And recognizing patterns when you see them actually means you have to know what resources are available at a point in time that you can actually use to solve your problem. So here you can actually see that we have a regular pattern, and that pattern is that each number in the sequence increments by 2, right? So every number actually adds up with 2. Does that make sense for you, Miracle? Or is he even on the call at all? Okay, he's not on the call. But do you guys get what I'm talking about? I know most of you probably have solved it, but what you're looking for is what patterns are already available, you know. And here you can see that what we have is an increment of 2 in between each numbers, right? So that means if our initial number is 1, which we believe everything will always start from 1, then we need to add 2 to each round so that it increments by 2 and not by 3, which is what a miracle did. Does that make sense? So if I should run this, then we should get the accurate thing. So 1, 3, 7, 9, 11, 13, 9. We get all odd numbers throughout. Does that make sense for those of you who haven't done the assignment? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So
Yes, I mean.
as you can see, we are actually writing the assignment inside. I'm writing the code using a snippet in Chrome, in the developer console. So I'm not using Visual Studio Code and I'm not using the console. So this is another way you can actually what's it called, write JavaScript. So you can basically create custom files within this JavaScript and within the developer console, and with that custom file you can actually write normal JavaScript. Does that make sense? So that's what I'm using now, and I can add more snippets. I can decide about the JS. I can add several other ones. You get?
Sorry, sir, because there was noise from someone's background. I could barely hear you.
Okay, I'm just showing you another way you can write and test JavaScript code, like directly inside of the browser. So it's by going
Okay.
to the sources tab and then creating a
I
new.
can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I said I'm just showing you the other way you can actually create JavaScript files inside of the browser directly if you don't want to go through the stress and hassle of having to open Visual Studio Code. You can actually start writing JavaScript snippets inside of your browser and use the sources folder. So let me just close this and open it again. So let me open the Brave browser. That now. So when I open it, you right click and go to your inspect tool. So under your developer console, basically, you want to go to sources, right? And here, if you have any other files inside of your project, you actually see most of the files that is already being used inside of your project. So let's just slightly reload this, and you can see that my initial code is actually running, which is what I wrote inside of where, yeah, here. So you can create new snippets, and if you are not seeing the snippet page, so you can see here we have the index.html, which is our HTML file, right? So we can actually see it. So we are seeing the sources of this page, that is the source files that made up this particular page you are looking at, right? And we are seeing the JS file, which is what we have in our Visual Studio Code. So you are seeing all of that. Hmm? So basically, this sources just gives you access to the file. So if we go to any website, for instance, like let's say facebook.com, and facebook.com might be a little bit too sophisticated for that. So let me just say google.com. So when I go to google.com, I can kind of just refresh this. So I'm under snippets at the moment. So you can see this is the Google source code, right? This is the HTML template for it. So if I go over to sources and I go to page, you actually see the pages that makes up all of the all of the files that actually makes up this Google home page. So you can see we have JSON, we have this is the HTML. You can see doc type, and then this is a minified kind of HTML that you can actually read with your bare eyes, because not necessarily minified, but it's not written in the conventional way, so it's probably compiled. So you can see that now, right? So this way you can also see the images being used. So this is what the sources folder actually gives you. So remember, the element folder just gives you an overview of the structure of your page, while the console gives you like more like the output of whatever you log into the console. or whatever error your program has at the point in time. Then for sources, you actually get to access different assets that a particular project is consuming. So here we have different assets here, more like, and you might probably not understand this, but just know that these are the files that makes up this particular page you're looking at. And let me just kind of look for a more simply like more like a simple website, not something of this nature. So I'm thinking of, okay, let me look for more like maybe like a normal church website. So let's just, because church websites are not always sophisticated. The rock. So basically you would see the files that makes up that particular project. So here we see pages. So you see everything. You can see the HTML, right? So this is basically the HTML file. Kind of contains more sophisticated things, but you can see CSS and so on inside of it. So it's very similar to what you might get when you inspect elements, for instance. But here you can actually see what's inside the actual file. So you can see the declaration of their variables and so on. Then you can see the script tag. Though this is basically the file you are opening, right? So this is it. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about here? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So just like we have index.js in our own folder, this is their own index.js, and it could be anything for different kinds of projects depending on the convention that the developer used while coding it. But this is actually, this sources folder gives you access to the files that makes up a particular project. So I think that's as simple as it can get. So for our own page here, you can actually see that we have three. We have styles.css, which is this styles.css, right? Then we have index.js, which is this index.js. And you can see that we are seeing the exact same files here, right? So you can see we are seeing primitive data types. So it is actually the file you get to access. Then we are also seeing the HTML file, which is this HTML file. And we can't see this other HTML file because there's no link or association that this page has with this other HTML file. So that's why we don't get to see it. But just like you should know that really, because we'll be exploring all of the tabs under the developer console. So we've done 1, 2, 3 now, I believe. So now you understand what this does, and what this does, right? So that I don't assume. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I already started recording locally. So if I'm recording locally, I don't think we should really do any live recording, right? I don't think it's necessary because it might still break eventually and it might lead to unnecessary complexity. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think we have to go back to turning on our videos one more time. Please, everybody, your cameras on. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so let's go back and start working on our conditional. So from what we did yesterday, can any one of you remember anything from what we tried and what we learned yesterday? So yesterday we started talking about control flows, and one of the things we started saying about control flows is that by default your program would run from top to bottom, and it would evaluate every statement line by line, one line after the other, and it keeps going on and on. So then I mentioned the fact that it is not at every point in time that your program will have to follow the sequence of a straight line. There are times when your program will have to branch, and your program will have to we get to a crossroad where it has to make some decisions on its own based on what the user is feeding it with. So we saw the idea of conditional execution, right? Using if statements. Can you remember? Or you have using it to eat Gary? Or you used it to eat Gary rather. Hello. You've
I
used it to
remember,
eat
sir.
Gary or used it to eat and used it to eat fried rice. For the ones that eat fried rice. Okay. So I said programs will not always go along, So can you see now? See we are frozen. Hello. What is happening? Can you guys hear me now?
Your
Hello.
voice is even breaking. I don't know why it's
But
working.
what's the issue with? Am I the only person facing this thing with MTN for quite some days now? Like it's been almost 5 days, and this
I
has.
hear you, but
Eh? I can't even hear.
MTN really bad. Yes, MTN.
It's
Even
a cracking. So
I can't
it's
even
not
hear anyone.
MTN.
I can't even hear
It's
what
not
you
MTN.
guys
It's
are.
different.
It's terrible.
It's you know.
It's very terrible. So, but that's fine. Can you guys hear me now?
Abigail, please, where are you staying so I can relocate?
Wait, you said that MTN is okay. Eh?
It's not where I'm. Even my sister's MTN is bad, but my own MTN is
Wow.
maybe because it's my company
Did you
line.
kind
Okay.
of pour anointing oil on top or something?
I think it's because it's my company SIM.
Okay, okay.
So
Okay, maybe it's a
maybe
high
special.
Is
priority.
it?
So where is your company so that we can come and take our SIM as well? Take our SIM cards. Okay, that's all right.
Is this a
So we looked at control flow and we looked at the subject of conditional rendering. So we had two versions of the same, almost the same program. So the first version is just more like the first version is basically like running from top to bottom, evaluating one statement and jumping to the other. And then we were receiving a number from the user using a prompt, method from an inbuilt method of JavaScript. So we were using that, and then all we just did was just receive an input from the user, but we were expecting a number. Then I said, most times your user will not always give you what you are expecting, so you have to be able to perform certain checks, and based on the checks you perform, you should be able to give your user the corresponding message based on what they input into the input feed that you probably give to them, which is in this case a prompt, dialog box. So we were able to kind of conditionally listen for whether or not what the input that the user is actually inputting is a number type. So if it is not a number type, we alerted you must enter a number, which is what we did here. Otherwise we are saying you just enter the valid number. So we saw that in if statement you don't just have to handle one condition, you could also handle the reverse. That is, if it is not this, then it has to be that. So because it is not this, then we are outputting this as the reverse case for the reverse scenario. So that's what we were able to look at. Then we also went further to evaluate more than one branches. So in case your program is not just a yes or no or this or that, what if this, that, or what if you have a case of this, that, and those? You have more than two conditions to evaluate. So we now we saw this small program that actually creates more like a grading system for us, where we have a score, and based on the value of the score, we are able to decide whether the student got an A or got an F. Does that make sense? Can you remember how we did all of that? Or I should start all over? Say the truth and shame the devil. Should we start all over? Eh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so basically let me get rid of all of these, then let's start all over. I remember what I said about return values and side effects. Can you remember that? Hello?
Side effects, sir.
You
I
remember
don't
what I said
remember
about
side
it?
effects. I remember return values, but I don't remember side effects.
Okay, let me just show you quickly. So hope you don't have any other thing. So let's go here, and then for side effect, I said your functions will do two things basically. No matter what kind of function you're writing, it's either your function creates a side effect, or your function returns a value. So I said for the side effect, what your function is doing in this case is that it is affecting the flow of your program. So you probably defined a variable before, or you had an array before. Then with your function you are able to update a part of your program, so that the subsequent lines that follows will behave differently based on what the execution of that function does that make sense? So here we saw a case where we had a variable, and the value of the variable is the number 3. Then inside of our function we updated the variable to become 4. Yeah. And then when we run the function, so instead of 3 as the value of my var, we now have 4 as the value of my var. So let me just let me quickly do that. Let me quickly comment this out and let's run it. So we declared a variable with a value of 3, right? Assign the value of 3 to my var. And let me just remove the array for now, because those are two different things we are trying to communicate. So you can see we have a variable, and what is the initial value of the variable? Can I get a witness?
3.
Yeah. So inside of our function name is update var, right? Then we are setting it equal to 4. In other words, we are reassigning a value to the variable we already declared and assigned a value to on line 449, right? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so by default, the value of my var is 3. But the process through which the function here updates the value of my var, yeah, is what we refer to as a side effect. So the execution of the function actually creates a side effect in our overall program. And that side effect is that the variable here is getting reassigned and it is getting updated to 4. Does that make sense? So if I save it, you can actually see that my var is now 4 and not 3. But if we didn't call this function as we did here on line 457, you realize that the value of my var will remain the same, which is 3. That is what we assign here. So being able to change this value to 4 inside of the scope of this function is what we know as a side effect. Does that make sense? What we refer to as a side effect. Yeah. So that's one of the things. And I also did the same thing with an array, which is this particular array. And let me just remove this. Of course, you are familiar with what array.push does, right? Array.push just adds an element to the end of an array, an existing array. That's what I said. Can you remember? So here we have an array with objects, with the number of items, 3 number of items. So the first item is 1, the second one is 2, the third one is 3. So inside of our function body, we did my array, which is this variable we are declaring here. And remember, this is a non-primitive data type. So that means we can directly alter it without reassigning. Does that make sense? So that's why we can directly alter my array. And what we are doing is we are using an array method here, which is the push method. And then we are pushing 4 into the array. And if you see the description we have here, it will append a new element to the end of the array and returns the new length of the array. Does that make sense? So here we push 4 into the array. That means the array is supposed to become 1, 2, 3, and 4 after this operation on line 454. So when I save this, after logging my array to the console, when I save it, we'll see what is that. Okay, I'm not actually calling the function, so I have to call the function here on 457, right? So when I call it, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 inside of the array, right? But the original array is this. So we have been able to affect the state of our array inside of our function. So that means we've created a side effect with our function. Does that make sense? So our function is changing the world.
Wow.
Yeah, awesome. So that's what a side effect is basically. It's where your function changes the world. You know. So that's it. So it changes the future of your program, because this automatically has altered the future of our program, because we've been able to update the array, and now we're adding something new to it, and eventually we get that new thing together with the old elements in the array. So basically that's what the side effect is all about. But this is not the only thing you can do with a function. You can also return a value with a function. And what I can do is, instead of doing my array dot push and just doing that, I can actually decide to return a value inside of my array. And what that means is that in as much as I create a side effect with my array and with my function, which is more like pushing a new element into an existing array outside of my function body, I can also decide to return a value from my function. And what that means is that whatever computation I carry out within the body of my function, it will consolidate into that value that I'm returning. And that doesn't stop all these other side effects I have from running. And let me just keep it this way. So if I should do this now and I say update var, so update var basically now, let me will return a value. And when I run update var, you will see that we still have an element pushed to our array. And let me just remove this to make it clear and to kind of be concise with what I'm doing. So basically at this point that we have 1, 2, 3, that is, we've not done anything to the array, but we are trying to return the value of this array. So let's say we now want to create a new variable, and we call it new array, and we can now assign new array to update var, which is the function, and call the function. And guess what is going to happen? If I log new array into the console, what we are going to get is the value of what we returned here. And guess what we returned? What did we return? We returned my array. So if I log new array to the console, we get the same thing still, right? But these are two different variables. And then this, okay, just to let me do something different. So let's do this now. So let's say on this line, we say let's say updated array equals my array dot push, and I'm pushing 4, right? Then here I want to return updated array. Does that make sense? So when and we are setting new array to the update var, which is the product of calling this function. So when I save now, what is that? What did I do? 460. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to figure out what is happening here. So we set the updated array to my array. So what we are pushing in what exactly is happening to the 5 we are getting? Let me check here. So updated array equals my array dot push. So we are pushing one more element to updated array. So here we are returning updated array, so which should be just fine. Okay. Is everything okay? Oh. Yeah, that should be it. So let me update let's see. Something is not alright. So okay, let me just let me get rid of this, and let's try to let me do something else and see if whatever it is I'm doing is okay. So why isn't that reassigning? So let's my array, so my array. Okay, my array dot push. So for some reason that doesn't behave in the expected way, but that's fine. So what I'm just trying to show you here is you can actually return a value from an array. and I wonder why that isn't working my array. That's probably one of the weird things. So assigning this to this, so I think this will have something to do with the heap or stack of variables in JavaScript, because there's something such as references and values. So that's probably what's resulting in this, and I don't want to go into all of that now. So but here we have we have an updated array inside of our function body, and we are setting that equal to my array. So setting that equal to my array, then we are returning updated array, which is what we declared inside of this function body. So when we did a console.log of this, and let me just remove this. So you can see that we have a new variable now, which is new array. Then we are setting it equal to the result of calling or invoking this function. So when we call the update var function, so, and let me just remove this and do new array into the console and save. So you can see we get the same result, but here what we are actually getting the value from is we are getting the value from calling a function by itself. We call the function and we are getting a value in return. So here we are not just having a side effect in our function, but instead we are having we're having a value return, and we can actually use that value anywhere else in our program. And realize that you have to understand that I have to realize I actually have to invoke this function by using the parentheses. If I just do this, you see that what we get is a function in return. So you have to call the function in order to be able to return the value from that function. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Do you want is there anything that is unclear in this regard?
No. Mine is just why this thing was working before and it's not working
The
again.
push?
Yes. Because we literally saw when it worked.
Yeah. So let me try this. So what is actually happening is it's and I don't want to go into reference and values basically, because for non-primitive data types, when you have a primitive data type in JavaScript, and I don't want to overflog this one, because it will result in me having to explain a lot of things that we are not quite ready for. So when you create a primitive variable, like that is a variable that is a primitive data type in JavaScript, it gets stored, it gets saved inside of the stack in your memory. But when you have a non-primitive data type, it gets stored in what we call the heap. So the stack is just basically it's more like a shelf of different values, so they get stacked on top of each other. But for the heap, the way you actually store a variable in the heap is that the variable is in a particular location, more like a random location in memory, and then there has to be a reference to that particular position in memory. So whenever you call the variable, you have a reference for that variable on the stack, and then through the stack you are able to reference where the address of that particular value is or data is on the heap. I know this is going to be quite unclear, but you can actually do your homework on learning about stacks and heap in JavaScript. It tells you about how JavaScript actually allocates memory to different kinds of variables based on their data type. Does that make sense? So the reason why are you with me? The reason why this doesn't get updated inside of our function body like in this manner is because when you reassign an array, for instance, like try to do something like this to an array, it still references the same variable or the same data in memory, because it doesn't recreate. For primitive data types you cannot alter it, but for non-primitive data types you can actually alter it and you can change it. So if you have a new variable like this, for instance, and you are trying to do something else with it, it is still the same variable, it is still the same place in memory it is pointing to. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's just like if you read about the stack and the heap, in JavaScript, and how variables are referenced, you will understand what is going on here, which I don't want to go over too much. But basically we are doing this now, and then you see that when we log my array into the console, it actually receives the side effect. It receives the fourth variable, the fourth item in the array. But this other one doesn't receive the fourth item in the array. Instead, it just logs 4. Yeah. And there are many more weird things that you will encounter as you code JavaScript. So this is just one of them. For instance, one other weird thing about JavaScript, let me just talk about that quickly, is that, for instance, when you have, let's say, console.log, so okay, what I'm trying to do is, this is what I'm trying to show you. For instance, when you say type of, I say type of, I think that's type of null. So you can see that type of null is actually returning an object. And how in the world,
Yes.
now you understand what an object is, but how in the world is null supposed to be equal to an object? So it's one of the, and basically this is a bug in JavaScript, and the reason why it has not been fixed is because if they fix it, it is going to affect a lot of existing projects that people have already pushed to production. So it's just more like you just have to leave it the way it is, as long as people know how to maneuver the way around getting it to work. Does that make sense? So it's just one of those weird things. So we understand the idea of side effects and returning a value from a function now, right?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so let's go on to conditional execution. So when I say control flow, do you understand what that means now? Hello? Oh, sorry. Hello? Do you understand what I mean by
Yes, sir.
control flow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's just more like how JavaScript reads your code from top to bottom, and then you want to be able to manage and handle how that flow actually is handled by JavaScript. So basically, one of the ways we have to handle our control flow is we have conditional execution, which basically allows you to determine how where your program goes based on the feedback you get from your user, because definitely you always be getting feedback from users. So the conditional execution is just basically you using the if keyword, and then we have one other one which is switch, but we are not talking about that now. So we have the if keyword, which basically checks for one condition, and the way the if keyword works, and let me just remove this. So the way the if keyword is that you use the keyword if, which is a reserved keyword in JavaScript because it carries out this particular functionality. So you open a parenthesis in front of it, and inside of the parenthesis is the condition you want to test. So the condition you are testing will either evaluate to true or false. So it could be a comparison operator or an expression with a comparison operator, more like you doing 2 is greater than 4. In other words, when 2 is greater than 4, that is if 2 is greater than 4, then you should do this. Otherwise, don't do anything. That's what this is saying. Right? So when I run this code now, if 2 is not greater than 4, then nothing gets logged into the console. But if I say 2 is less than 4, that will become a truth value. Then if 2 is less than 4, then this code will run. You get, so we see do something. So here we are able to actually check for a particular condition, and whether or not that, based on whether or not that condition is true, the block and the code inside of it, or the statement inside of the block of code is going to run. So when I say the block of code, I'm actually talking about what inside an opening curly brace and between an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And this is what a curly brace is. So we have different kinds of brackets you can use in JavaScript. This is one, this is another, and then we also have you know, this especially when you are doing something like TypeScript, but basically you will have this, then you will have this. So these three are the ones you'll be using for the most part in JavaScript. Does that make sense? Then of course we use this to
Yes.
represent greater than, less than, and so on. And then that's the star and parent brackets inside of the HTML. Okay, so that's fine. So then I said you will not always have a test for just one condition. You might have more than one condition, but in most cases you might have two. That means you are testing for something that is if this. Then if that's not the case, then you have the else keyword, which specifies what your program is going to do if what you have in your if block is not is not true. That is, if this value does not evaluate to true, this code will not run. Otherwise it is this one that will run. So we have what's that? So 2 is less than 4. So when I change this and reverse the condition to 2 is greater than 4, you see what we see here is going to be do nothing. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then
Yes,
I said
sir.
you can also test for more than one condition, which basically is you doing another if, else if, right? Then you can have another condition here, and you can say if 2 is greater than 1, right? Then you can do this. Then it says 2 is greater, but ultimately when you have more than 2 conditions to test for, so you have your if block, then you have your else if block with its own condition, then ultimately you want to do an else. That is, if none of these 2 conditions evaluates to true, then you want to do this, which is going to be what you have in your else block. So you're going to say what's it called, more like if none above is truthy, so this is what you want to do. So let's say this is false, let's say 2 is greater than 10, and then this is also false, 2 is greater than 4, then you will see we have what we have in the else block. So you can have more than one else if blocks, just make sure you specify the appropriate condition. Does that make sense? So we'll have if this, then else if this, then else if this, then ultimately you have else. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So that's that about your preliminary knowledge for if and else if statements. So here we have a variable which is the score, which is what we did yesterday. Then we are actually testing the grade of a student and evaluating what the grade of a student will be based on the score that the user enters. And then we started out by testing if score, just basically what we're doing here. So we have the if keyword, then the condition inside of the parentheses, then we have the block, which is going to have an expression in between. And then I said this block will only run if this value is truthy. Does that make sense? Is that clear enough, or do I have to repeat it? Hello?
Sir, please.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
Sir, please.
Yes,
repeat.
sir.
Okay, so I said we have the keyword here, which is the if keyword. Then following the if keyword will be a parenthesis that is going to contain a condition, right? And then the block that follows that parenthesis, which is what you have in this curly brace, will only run if the value or the condition here evaluates to true. Does that make sense? That is, if this condition is not evaluated to true, that is a truthy value, then this particular block will not run. And you can see that for the fact that I just changed this to true makes the rest of the code unreachable. That is, it's telling you that all of this will not run because it's already obvious that this is true. But if I change this to false, then it proceeds to advance. Then it tells you grade this one out because it's telling you that your Visual Studio Code is telling you that this will not run. It's an unreachable code because there's no way in the world this block will run as long as this condition evaluates to false. Does that make sense? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically at the point now, it's still a variable because we don't know. And at this point, we also don't know. So our program is waiting for the user to enter a value before it can decide if this will be truthy or falsy. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine. So so we have this now. So when we run this code basically, and then based on what we enter, so if we enter 70, which you saw yesterday, we are going to get, you got an A. Then if we enter, let's say 12, to say you got a F. And I don't know why an F actually sounds better in my mouth than a F. Any which way. Is it the same for you? Say an F or a F.
I think it's an S.
Yeah, because I know in school just say in give me F. You know, we don't used to say it the way we are supposed to. Maybe that's why we never really got to learn that. It's either, maybe that's why we never really got to learn if it's A or R, because we only said it in teaching. Or you didn't do that in your school, like when you don't do well in an exam, you just say the lecturer gave you. But when you did very well, you say I scored.
And
So you just say he gave me F, he gave me D, he gave me E. Okay, so I think it's an F basically. Yeah, I think that sounds better. So let's try and check it with our correct English. So okay, we got an F. Yeah. So that's how it works. So you can see here we are evaluating for more than one condition. This is the first one, this is the second one, and you can see that for the fact that score is not greater than 70 for the last one we did, which let's try it again. So if score is not greater, let's say score is 30, and where does 30 fall? 34, 30 obviously will not be truthy for this, right? Because score is 30 here. Is 30 greater than 70 or equal to 70? No. Then here is 30 greater or equal to 60? No. Then here is 30 greater than or equal to 50? No. Then here is 30 greater than or equal to 40? No. Then what do we have? We have this block as the alternative. So this is what we run otherwise. So if we do 30, then we see we got an F, right? Does that make sense? Hello?
yes, sir.
Laura, why are you sitting like someone that's thinking about her life like that?
Yes, sir.
Laura, what's going on? Are you alright? Huh? But she's
I
sleeping.
think you're asleep.
Yeah. Chat.
That's it.
She's off already.
Wow. I believe she must be very tired. Maybe that's why people don't even turn on their camera. I wonder how many people have already slept. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so do you understand what we are doing here? Is it clear? Triumph, you're just trying
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
now. Are you trying to?
Triumph is trying not to sleep.
Put pepper inside your eye now. Okay, so let's comment this out. So then this is everything you actually need to know about if statement. Though there are other nice ways to actually use if statements, but this is basically the building block for if else if statements. Does that make sense? So if you understand what I just explained, that means you shouldn't have any issue with if statements ever again in JavaScript. So you can now you can go on to build your own Twitter so that you can ban Tinubu and co. Okay, so that's fine. So we have this. So is everybody okay with the fact that this is clear? Laura, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I see you're back. Welcome back. Okay. Is everybody
I
okay?
understand.
Yeah, is everybody okay? I know you understand. Is everybody okay with the explanation so far on if else if, or do you have any question you want to ask? And just to wrap it up, let me just make it clear. So we have the keyword, then we have the condition in parentheses, right? Then we have the block, that is the statement we want executed. So this is it basically. And the keyword is what? What's the keyword? Basically.
If.
Yeah, if. Then the condition could be anything as long as it evaluates to a boolean, right? The condition could be anything that is either true or false. It could be anything that is either true or false. Then our statement could be anything, even as simple as a console.log. Then you write whatever you want to write. Is that okay? So this is basically how it works. Then if you have more than one condition, then all you need to do is what? Do else if else if then another condition, right? Does that make sense? Then you have another block to execute. Then ultimately you want to have an else statement with the final block if nothing above is truthy, right? Say truthy. So that's just it basically. So I'm going to just going to remove it, but I hope that's clear. So the other control flow we have is the loop, right? And I know we did a couple of things about loops yesterday. So one of the first things we checked was we gave an illustration of how about you want to log all the even number between 0 and 100 and 10. I think what we did was 10 to the console. Definitely if it is 10, you can actually guess all of those numbers from top of your head without even thinking twice. 2 4 6 8 10, right? Then I said that could be a problem when we have numbers like 10,000 and 1 million and so on. You have to be able to dynamically and programmatically solve this problem. So we saw the idea of having loops. Then the first loop we looked at was the while loop, and I said the while loop we actually basically you have the while keyword, and then you also have a condition, right, which could be anything as long as it evaluates to true or false. Then you will have your statement that you want to execute. Then after every round you want to increment a particular variable, which is basically going to be your counter, because if you don't do anything incremental, your loop will run infinitely. Do you remember that? And you see how yesterday I actually ran something without a value that increments, and it kept on running. It even ran over 1 million times. You were looking at my console and you saw how it executed for more than 1 million times, and my entire browser just froze. Right? Can you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Then I felt sorry for my computer because the fan began to spin so loud. And you don't want to do anything like that to your users because they will curse you for creating their website. So you basically want to ensure that you don't run infinite loops, because the way to definitely be on your on your user's machine, except if you are running the loop on your maybe on your server, then it will be on your virtual machine, which you are going to be paying heavily for, depending on the number of activities we have going on there. So basically what we have is, okay, let me just kind of go over that again. So now we see a problem in view. We want to log all of the numbers between even numbers between 0 and 10 to the console. So definitely we won't be doing this, because if we do this doesn't solve it programmatically. And then the reason why you are learning how to code is so that you don't have to be writing things all over and over again, so that you can be able to dynamically handle similar cases with the same with the same lines of code. So here we want to be able to we have a while keyword, and instead of a while keyword you want a condition that defines when the loop will stop. So that's what's happening here basically. Then here you will have a block. Then you definitely want to have a counter, and then to update your counter, because your counter is how you actually keep track of the condition to ensure that it gets to a point that even though the condition was initially truthy, it has to eventually come to a point where it is false, because everything that has a start must have an end, right? Naturally, if something has a beginning, it has to have an end. So that's what the loops are all about. When you have a condition that specifies how long or when this loop should run, then definitely you also want to be able to do it in such a way that that process will come to an end eventually, and that coming to an end will depend on the condition you have here. So that's why I said you don't want to do something like you don't want to say while 5 is greater, or let's say while 10 is less than 100. Definitely forever and ever 10 will be less than 100. So if you should run this loop, it is going to be running forever. And I invite you to also try it on your computer in case you want to prove me wrong or you just want to kill your curiosity. So just try running this on your computer and just do a console.log running while loop with this block of code. Just try and run it on your computer and let me see what will happen. You probably won't be able to continue on this code, but do we have a volunteer? Or nobody wants to volunteer?
Nobody can volunteer, Joe.
Hello, does anybody want to? Okay, I think you want to volunteer.
So I did this afternoon. That was what happened. Like I had to, my total browser crashed. I never have network again.
Yeah, it became very terrible, right? It was almost like your computer is bad. You have to buy another one. Okay, so that's what happens because it will keep running infinitely. You have to be able to ensure that this condition will invert at a point in time. That is, you have to be able to change it from true to false based on this counter you are updating, right? Hello. So you might want to do something like let num be equal to 0. And let's just say what we want to do here. We just want to count up to 100, right? So we want to say while num, which is our num, is less than 100 or equal to 100. Let's say less than or equal to. So basically what we want to do, we just want to count up to 100. So here we just want to say console.log. So let's say counting from 0 to, this won't make sense. So let's say num. So I don't still want to run this. What is that? Okay, I need to add a plus, right? Counting from 0 to this. Then here I definitely have to do num equals num plus 1, right? So that way I increment it. So you can see it counted from 0 to 100. Can you see that? So that's what loops do basically. So once it gets to 100, this condition basically changes from false to true. Does that make sense? So let's see what's happening here. So let me console.log the expression itself. So let's see what it is here. And let's see what it is here. And you see that for every point in time, oh wow. So for every point in time, it's actually going to have either a truthy or falsy value. And ultimately, when it becomes falsy, the loop is going to stop running. So you see what is happening here. So you see that for every period between 0 and 100, it keeps evaluating to true, right? True. Then when it gets to 100, it becomes false, and then the loop stops running. But if there's no case where this will turn to false, then the loop will run forever. Why do I keep saying loop? The loop will run forever. So that's it. So is that clear now? So definitely, regardless of the kind of loop you're having, whether it's a for loop, a while loop, a do while loop, it has to, you have to have a condition that will change over time. If not, it will run forever. And there's no such thing as forever in terms of loop. It will just crash your computer. Okay. Not crash beyond repair basically, but just crash to the point that you might have to restart it for it to get itself back. Okay, so that's what we have here. So we have a loop here that counts basically from 0 to 100. Is that okay?
Yes.
Is everything clear?
I get the loop, no. The increment was what I was missing. That's why my assignment didn't exactly.
What were you missing?
The increment.
Eh?
The increment we just.
Okay,
talk
the
about
increment.
now.
Okay. Yeah, you have to increment it definitely. You have to increment. If you don't increment, it's going to be a problem. So when you want to increment like this, so there are different ways you can actually increment. So you can do num plus plus. Yes. So this also will work. This will increment by one after every iteration. Does that make sense? You can also do I think, yeah, maybe if I can remember the syntax. So you can also do this. So it will still work the same way. So these are the different ways you can actually increment by one. So this is more like a shorthand operator of saying num equals num plus one. So you can do this. And if you don't want to do this, you can also do num plus plus. So that's also going to increment it by one. So you can see it still does the same thing. Does that make sense? So let me keep this one because this one is always very nice to have. Okay. So that's that about the while loop. So let's do the other one, which is actually very simple.
Sorry to bring you back, sir.
Okay.
Num plus plus means num plus one, right?
Yes, it means plus one. Yeah.
Okay.
It basically means
That means 0 plus 1.
it's just like an increment operator. It means if you also do minus minus, you subtract minus one from.
Okay, so what if I want to do 2?
We have to do plus 2 then. So what you can do, you can use this shorthand property if you want to do 2. So basically, you want to do what's that? You want to do plus equal to. Say while is not defined. What do you mean while is not defined? Okay. That's very surprising actually. So you can see what we have here. So we have 0, 2, 4, 6. So you can see it increments with 2 after every round.
Okay.
So this is actually, I think this is easier to write than when you have to do num equals num plus. You get.
Okay. Plus equal to 2.
So when you do plus plus, you only get 1.
So I cannot do plus plus plus.
Ah. It's a festival of plus. So I don't think that exists. I don't think so. Okay. Doesn't actually exist. So it's on plus, but I know this is the increment operator, so they call it the. Then we also have minus minus like this, which we also take 1 after every round. You understand me? Okay, so I think we missed our curly brace. Okay, so that's that. So let's do the do while loop, or is it the do loop? You also call it. You can call it the do loop or do while, right? So basically, what this does is you have the do keyword, then you start out with your statement, then you want to end it with the condition. While you can say num is greater than while okay, and this is going to result to the next assignment I will give you. Num 100 is greater than num, or 20 is greater than num. So let's just define our num here be equal to 0. So here we can do console.log. Then we can do, so we can do num plus plus, right? Basically, right? So basically, this is the syntax for the do loop, and the difference between the while loop and the do loop is that the do loop will run at least once. Are you with me? The do loop will run at least once before it stops running. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the do loop will run at least once before it stops, while the while loop, you can actually, it doesn't have to run at all if the condition is not true. So let's see this. So you can see here we have 0 to 19, right? So here, if so that's it basically. So it will have to run at least once. So let's say I change this number to 20. So you can see it actually ran once. So we say while number, are you getting it? As we say while number is less than 20, while 20 is greater than 20 number, that is while number is less than 20, yeah. So it should run, but that initial running will actually go through. You get it? So initially number is 20, so it will run at least once for the do loop. Does that make sense? Hello?
Sir, please explain again.
I said for the do loop will run at least once.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah, it will run at least once, because you can see here, let's say, let me go back to the while loop. Just so let's say we have this. So we are checking if it is less than or equal to 100. So let's say 101. Basically. So you can see it doesn't run at all. Are you seeing that? It doesn't run at all because the initial condition is false, right? So it does not run.
Yes.
But for the do loop, even if the initial condition is false, it will still run at least once. Then it will now stop. Does that make sense? You can see 20, and just to be clear, let's do 19 so that it can be clear. Okay, 19 is greater than num. So num starts out at 20, but it is still going to run. Does that make sense? It still runs and logs number to console. Then afterwards, it now sees that okay, the condition is no longer true, then it stops. Does that make sense? But if I change this to 0, everything works the same way. You can see it works the same way. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 18. But the only difference is that even if the condition is initially false, the do loop will still run. That initial run will execute. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's basically the only difference between the do and while loop, other than the syntax, right? Because the while loop only has while, and there's nothing else. It's just like one block, right? One curly brace. But here we have, still one curly brace, but basically we have two keywords, do and while. So basically we are saying do this block while this condition is true. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the next one we are going to be looking at is the for loop, which is also a different kind. And I think we'll just end on the subject of loops today. I don't want to overflog it. So we have the for loops. So basically here you will have the for keyword, and after the for keyword you will have a couple of things. So first of all, you have to say let's I, right? Then you now say, you specify your condition in the middle. While I is less than 100, then you now want to increment your I plus plus, or I equals I plus 1. Then you put your code here. Does that make sense? So this one is actually very dynamic in that it can allow you to do a wide range of dynamic things with your data, because here the counter is actually a part of the program. Does that make sense? So here's what I mean. Okay, for instance, we can now say console.log. At every point then we can console.log I, right? So here initially we don't need to specify the value of our counter outside of our loop. Here we can just declare the value of our counter inside of the loops inside of the loops parentheses here where we have the condition. So the first one is the initial value of the iterator. The second one is the condition that will bring this loop to a close. Then the third one is the increment. So if I save this, what's happening? So we have okay, so for let I equal 0, then while I is greater than, it's supposed to be while I is less than, so that didn't run. Oh, do you guys understand what happened? So we are doing while I is less than. So you can see we have this now. Let me remove this. I actually thought maybe I had a syntax error. So when we save this, we are going to see that we have 0 to 99. So while I is greater than. So you can see we're actually achieving the very same set of things, but here we just have a couple of different syntax. But this for loop is actually very powerful because you can use it to do a lot of things. There are things you use this for that you probably the do and while loop might not be a very good fit for those. So here we have a for loop, and then we are just logging the value of I, and then you can use the I to do a lot of dynamic things like I said. So let's say we have, and here's an example of what you can do. Let's say we have an array, and then inside of the array we have what's it called, 1, 2, or let's say we have let's say Abigail. She has a spelling, right? Then we have
Yes, sir.
you spell things sometimes, and when you read it again, you be like, is this the correct spelling? It just looks like it's something really like you've never seen anything like that before. You like, so we have triumph, we have okay, we have precious semicolon as well. Then we have sorry. Okay, so we have all of this. So the other dynamic thing you can do, and this is what makes for loops basically very powerful. So you can easily do things like, okay, while I is less than, are you with me? My array
Yes.
dot length. You get the point. So in other words, while it is less than the length of this array. So you want to console.log, and you will use the bracket notation. Console.log my array at the index of I. Does that make sense? So that means it is going to check at the index of 0, at the index of 1, at the index of 2, at the index of 3. You get the point? But it is not going to exceed array.length. So when we save this, you will see what it does. So you can see it logged all of the names in our console. Abigail, Triumph, Precious, Yetunde. You see that? Hello?
Yeah.
So you see the kind of things
So
that...
again, I don't get it.
Eh?
Please go by it again. I don't really get it.
Okay, but you know what the length keyword does, right?
Yes.
So this is just an example of what you can use the for loop to do. You can basically use these ones to do it as well, but the for loop just does this in a very, very elegant manner. You get, like, it's an elegant solution for things like this. So basically we have an array of things that we want to iterate over. In other words, we want to go through each element inside of the array. Then the for loop, the way you write it is, you definitely have a keyword, which is the for keyword. Then you have a parenthesis in front of it, which contains 3 things basically. So that is the first thing you have inside of the parenthesis is the initial value of your counter, which is your iterator, which is the I in this case. You can call this I whatever you like. You can call it J, you can call it, but the convention is basically I. You can call this anything. You can actually see that basically we are declaring a variable here, right? So you end it with a semicolon because it's a statement. Then the second statement is going to be your condition. So this is when you want this loop to come to a close. So here, because we have an array and we are trying to go over each element of the array, so what we want to do is what? We want to make the loop run for as long as our counter is less than the length of the array. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. So now the third thing inside of the parentheses is the counter. So this is the same as saying I equals I plus 1, like I said before, right? Does that make sense? So that means the initial round will be 0. I remember arrays are 0 based, right? Have a 0 based index.
Yes.
So that means my array dot at the index of I initially will be my array at the index of 0, because the initial value of I is 0. Then it counts and adds 1. Then we'll have at the index of 1, then we have an index of 2, then we have an index of 3. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So when I save this now, so we get the same value. get all of the names in our console. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello?
So I still don't understand though.
Which one of them?
What's okay? So now I understand like where my array dot length is supposed to
Let me
tell us
remove
the
the array
number.
so that let's just go back to the basics. Let me remove the length of the array. So let's say we have 10, right? So let me remove the length of the array. So can you go on from here? Let's get rid of the array first. Hello? Get to me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can go on. I said let's get rid of the array first. Let's just get the basics. So you can go on with your question.
Okay. I said I understood where you said that length. I understand where we added the length, the for loop, and the I plus plus is equal to is same as +1. Then when we log this into console.log.myArray, if it is like the normal understanding I had before, it's supposed to give me the name, like this Abigail Triumph that's listed. Now, what is the essence of the I that we put inside parentheses?
Okay, remember when we talked about dot notations and then bracket
Okay.
notations?
Okay.
You get? So the way we
Yes, sir.
access the element of an array is using the bracket notation.
Okay.
And I said to access any element of the array, you basically want to use the index. So now automatically we know that the value stored in this I is a type of a number, right?
Yes.
And then the initial value of that number is 0. So when the loop runs for the first time, when we say my array at the index of I, that is my array at the index of 0.
Okay.
So we keep incrementing and adding 1 to I. So after every round, we have I plus 1. So it will be at the index of 0 first, then at the index of 1, then at the index of 2. But we are doing that for as long as I is less than the length of the array, which means it won't run beyond the length of the array. Does that make sense?
All right.
So,
so it's only going to show the characteristics that we called the array for. It's not going to show more than what is inside the array
and that's
for
why we
this
set it to the
instance.
length of the array so that it doesn't exceed it.
Yes. Okay. I understand now.
You get the point?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And that's why when we did this dot the length of the array, which is what we did here. So we did I array dot length. So while it is less than my array dot length. So that means array dot, what is the length of this array basically? It is the number of elements that is inside of it, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So when I is less than 4, it will run this while I is less than 4. Does that make sense? And that's because it will start from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. You know, it is 0 base. So this has the index of 3. So when it gets to 3, the loop stops running because it is not less than or equal to 4. So it will never get to 4. Does that make sense? Triumph, you are trying to say something. Yetune, is that clear now?
So what if you...
Yes, sir.
Okay, Triumph.
What if you set I to be 4 exactly, like the same number of, or the same length of array that you put inside? What if it's not actually less than? What if it's equal to?
You mean here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, since our goal is to log everything inside of this array out, if we set I initially to 4, then our purpose is defeated. We set it to 0 because we want the iteration to start from the very first element in our array, which has a 0 index, the index of 0. Do you understand that? Because remember I said arrays have a 0 based index. So if I say my array, for instance, and log it to the console, you will see that we have what? We have the first element has the index of 0, right? The second one has the index of 1, the third one has the index of 2, then the fourth one has the index of 3. Then the length of the array itself is 4. So definitely 3 is less than 4, but 4 is not less than 4. So whenever it gets to 4 is less than 4, this value becomes what? Falsy. Then the loop stops running. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Triangle, does it make sense? Are you sure?
It's close.
Okay, that's fine. So that's it. So I think so these are the three major kinds of loop you'll be using. The other ones are basically, higher order array methods, which we are not talking about now. But basically, we have the while loop, we have the do loop, we have the for loop, right? So I think we can, just play around those at least for now. So I would have gone to switch statement, but let's stay here. Let's not go there for tonight. So is there any question at this point in time? And is everything clear so far? Hello?
For me, it's clear.
Any other person? Hello?
So if we added, say, an extra name to my array,
Yeah?
that's if we added extra name to my array, it will still output the extra name, right?
Yeah, because we are basically using a dynamic value, which is the length. So it doesn't matter what the length is, it will always take it into consideration. So even if I add okay, maybe it's because we've not added your name. So we've added your name. Which other person? Okay, we've added your first name too. So even if we do this, it's still going to log everybody. And that's the beauty of programming, because you can actually put dynamic values. You don't have to specifically know everything. You just have to know which variables exist that captures everything. Does that make sense? Then you use it. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is everybody okay with the explanation so far?
I'm okay.
Okay. God bless you for being okay. So I think that should be all for today. I don't want to go into other things so that it's not going to be overwhelming for you guys. So let's just stop on the subject of conditional execution and then iterations, which is basically what the loop does for you. So I'll be leaving you with an assignment inside of the group. So since we talked about heaps and stacks, so I want you guys to go and take a look at them. Then 4. Okay, what else? Okay. Then project, a short project, which is basically create a loop using any of the loops we've learned so far that counts down from 100 to 0. So those are the assignments, guys. Good luck, but you will need more than luck. Does that sound familiar to you, Precious? Good luck, but you will need more than luck. That's what they used to put on our examination question in school. Say good luck, but you will need more than luck.
No question.
Okay, so that's
Which kind of exam wishes is
they will
down?
say good luck, but you need more than luck. That's what they do in our department. Okay, so those are the questions basically, guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, so I'll see you guys on Friday. Please finish your assignments before Friday. I hope the recorded worked, but I recorded to the best of my ability.